Hi friends, one of the popular questions related to growing tomatoes in Aerogarden is what is the maximum number of plants we can grow? The simplest answer is one plant for every 3 holes, meaning maximum 2 plants in harvest, 3 plants in bounty, and 4 plants in farm models. Now the question is what happens when we grow more than that? Let's figure that out in this experiment. I have two Aerogarden Harvest 360 models here. In the first garden, I will grow 2 tomato plants, and in the second garden, I will grow 3 tomato plants. Starting this experiment all the way from the seed will take a lot of time. So I will use some cuttings to quickly verify the results. I have Aerogarden's red heirloom cherry tomatoes growing in this garden. This plant has a bunch of new and young branches. I will take a few cuttings from this plant and run the experiment using the cuttings. Growing from tomato cuttings is easy, fast, and straightforward. Any cutting that has some fresh growth will work excellent. Alright, I have 5 cuttings. Now I am doing some cleanup. Basically, removing some leaves and any new growth from the bottom. Now this looks perfect to transplant. I am repeating the same process on all cuttings. Some of these cuttings have flower buds and I am removing them as well. I want these cuttings to establish well and develop a nice root system before they start producing the flowers. Alright, now I have 5 nice cuttings ready to transplant into Aerogarden. Transplanting is very straightforward. Just take a sponge, slit it, open it, insert the cutting and place it into the pod. Easy peasy. Alright, I have 5 pots ready with cuttings. Now I will place them in Aerogarden. Here they are, one with 3 plants and the other one with 2 plants. I added same amount of nutrition, which is 8 ml to begin with. Once the plants are well established, I will add 2 ml of additional nutrients in the Aerogarden with 3 plants. It's been 3 days. I see the roots are being developed on all 3 cuttings. Here is a garden with 2 cuttings. These cuttings also developing the roots very well. It's been 15 days. All plants are being developed very well. Some of the plants started flowering already. This is a garden with 3 plants. All 3 plants are coming very healthy. Here is a garden with 2 plants. Both plants are doing excellent here as well. They are developing lots of branches and they started producing flower buds. Now that the plants are well established, I will bump up the nutrients a little bit in this garden with the 3 plants. Basically, I will add 8 ml to the garden with 2 plants and 10 ml of nutrients to the garden with the 3 plants. It's day 30. The garden with 2 plants is doing nice. I don't see this garden is overcrowded yet. The plants are spreading nice and producing lots of flower buds. Coming to the garden with 3 plants, I can clearly see this garden is overcrowded. Of course, the plants are doing nice and producing lots of flower buds. They are blooming and they started drying up as well. But the garden is definitely overcrowded. So I'm going to prune these plants so that I can give enough airflow. It's day 40. Both gardens are doing good. Starting with the garden with the 3 plants. The plants started producing baby tomatoes. All plants have lots of flowers, flower buds and baby tomatoes.
Coming to the garden with 2 plants. I see a bunch of baby tomatoes here as well. And there's a lot of flowering, flower buds, and tomatoes all over the plants. Both gardens are looking pretty similar, but this garden with 3 plants is again getting little overcrowded, so I'm going to prune some of the leaves. It's day 65. All plants are doing excellent. Starting with the garden with the 3 plants, I see a lot of tomatoes started ripening here. That's really good news. And all plants are doing very well. Some plants are still having lots of new development, lots of new flowers, flower buds. They are drying up and producing baby tomatoes. That's all going really good. Coming to the garden with 2 plants. Here also I see a couple of tomatoes started ripening. This is again good news. And both plants are doing very well. I'm eagerly waiting to harvest some tomatoes and compare their productivity side by side. It's day 70. I see a couple of tomatoes ripened very well in both gardens. Now I'm going to harvest the ripened tomatoes and measure their weight. Starting with the garden with the 3 plants. I recently started picking up the tomatoes little early. That's going to increase the productivity of tomatoes. These tomatoes can ripen nicely if I leave them on the counter for a day or 2. Alright, I got a couple of tomatoes. Now harvesting from the garden with the 2 plants. I follow the same thing. I harvested the tomatoes that are semi-ripened as well. I think that's pretty much. Before we weigh the tomatoes, let me just show you what is left on the plants. So here I see a bunch of tomatoes. I still see a lot of tomatoes here. Coming to the garden with the 3 plants. Yeah, I see a couple of tomatoes here as well. But compared to the other garden, these tomatoes are pretty less. One of the plant is still producing a lot of new growth. And I see flowers, flower buds and some baby tomatoes. But definitely the productivity from these 3 plants is not even close to the productivity of 2 plants. So this clearly tells that we can definitely manage 3 plants, but the productivity will be degraded for sure. I actually bumped up the nutrition in this garden. So instead of 8 ml, I started feeding a 10 ml while I'm feeding just 8 ml in this garden. But still these plants are not able to produce as many tomatoes as these 2 plants are producing. It doesn't matter how many plants we can manage in the garden. What really matters is the productivity of those plants. First, the harvest from the garden with 2 plants. This is 0.03 lbs. Now from 3 plants, this is 0.3.
Day 75. Lot more tomatoes have ripened very well and some of them are ready to harvest. Day 80. Most of the tomatoes have ripened in both gardens. It is very clear that the garden with 2 plants has more tomatoes compared to the garden with 3 plants. Even though I managed 3 plants in this garden, the productivity is not as great as the productivity from 2 plants. Even adding additional nutrients is not helpful. So the bottom line is we can manage as many plants as we want to, but we can't bring the productivity. Less plants are always more successful and more productive. Alright, that is all for now. Hope this side-by-side experiment is helpful to make the decision about how many plants you want to grow in your aero garden. Thanks for watching and happy gardening.